There we go. All right. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. It's great to see both so many familiar faces and a whole bunch of new faces. It's great to have everybody, in fact, such a huge room for the last session of today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Scott Schnall. I'm a principal technical writer on the Exchange team. Among other things, I'm responsible for the product documentation around high availability, site resilience, some virtualization stuff, and a few other areas. Today, I'm really excited to do yet another new edition of my long-standing Exchange 2010 tips and tricks sessions. How many of you have seen one of these before? All right, awesome. Well, hopefully, for those of you who haven't seen one before, you'll think this is quite a treat. For those of you who have seen one before, this is all new stuff, so you haven't seen this yet, and I really hope you like it. I also have a bunch of swag with me today, too. For instance, we have this Microsoft LifeCam we're going to be giving away. I also brought a brand new LG Nortel link-enabled UC telephony phone with a brilliant color screen. We're going to be giving that away today. I also have here this 32 gig Zune HD that has the Exchange Server logo embossed on the back of it. Now, I'm not giving the Zune away. I just like to tell people I have one. So now you all know. You can tweet about it. But since that was kind of mean, we'll go for the big thing right away. Now, I wanted to make this fair and easy and somewhat arbitrary to give everybody an equal chance to win. So what I did was I had a colleague of mine hide one of my business cards under a chair in this room. So very carefully, look under your chair and see if you find a business card of mine, which, by the way, I wrote something on, so if you happen to have one of mine from before, you're not going to know what to write on it. So, we found it. Now, just to make sure you didn't get that from me earlier, could you please read what it says on the back?
Duh, winning.
Excellent. Duh, winning. And that's what you've just done. You've won yourself a brand new phone. I'll leave it here for you. You can come up and get it at your convenience. One thing I'll say about that, the manufacturer, because we have no idea where in the world it's going to go, does not include the power cord. You'll have to get one yourself, but we've got a slip with details on what kind you need. Otherwise, it's fully functional, ready to go, latest firmware, and like I said, just a brilliant, brilliant display. But for those of you who didn't get the phone, don't worry. We've got a PowerPoint deck for you, so there's that. Okay, so let's get started. So I've grouped this into different groups. We're going to start with some announcements. We made some pretty major announcements this morning. If you hadn't heard them, I'm going to briefly repeat them. Then we'll talk about the basics of Exchange for those of you who might still be on 2003 and 2007, and you're wondering, is now the right time to move to 2010? For those of you who are making that move, we've got some planning and deployment tools we're going to cover in depth. We've got some scripts and troubleshooters I want to make sure you're all familiar with. I've got some great PowerShell tips for you, including examples you can take with you today and use in your production environment. And I've got some other stuff, some important news that we think the majority of our customers are going to want to know about as well. So, starting with the big thing, the announcements. In case you didn't read it on the Exchange Team blog, or on one of your Facebook friend pages, or on Twitter, or one of the many news feeds that carries, we today announced on the Exchange Team blog a support guideline change around our virtualization support for Exchange 2010 SP1. Specifically, two major changes. One is that the unified messaging role is now supported in a virtualized environment. And two, we are now going to support the combination of database availability groups with hypervisor-based clustering and migration technologies. Okay, is that cool stuff? Yeah, all right. Now, there are some caveats. I've got some of the caveats up here, but I don't want to steal the thunder from the people who did all the hard work on this. So instead, first, I'm going to point you to the blog entry so you can go get some more information if you haven't read it. And second, at the same time that this session is being repeated tomorrow, which none of you need to come to because it's the same thing, and I'm out of phones, I strongly encourage everybody in this room to instead go to the first breakout session, and Jeff Meliff and Jim Lucy will be there describing our support changes and going over best practices and some of our other guidance. And then there's another session, the interactive session, where Jeff Meliff, who's the PM in charge of this, by the way, along with Evan Morris from HP, who worked with us on the testing and validation aspect, they're going to be there having an interactive Q&A. So go to the breakout session, get the information, and then go to the Q&A and ask them all the questions that you have about this stuff. Some pretty important major stuff that probably affects a lot of people in this room. Okay, move on from the announcements and let's talk about the basics. Quick show of hands, how many of you are still on 2003? All right, how many of you are on 2007? All right, how many of you are in a mix of 2003 and 2007? All right, anybody purely 2010? All right, wow, great group of people, awesome. Well, so if you're already on 2010, you're already going to know some of the basics. You already know, for instance, we RTM'd quite some time ago, October 2009, and you probably knew where to download it once we made it generally available from our website as well. But what you might not know is that that code is hosting about 70 million mailboxes in our online services right now. So that code is really getting exercised quite vigorously in arguably the largest exchange infrastructure ever. So if you have any qualms or doubts about the stability or scalability of Exchange as it relates to your environment, don't even give it a second thought. This code rocks. Now, of course, we didn't stop there. We have Service Pack 1. We signed up for that last August, and that became readily available, worldwide download, a couple days later. There were some specific changes. We did a lot of feature work in it, but what you might not realize is we also did a lot of work around localization and adding additional language packs as well. In fact, this is more languages supported in Exchange that we've ever supported before, including for the first time ever, bidirectional language differences between the server and the client side using a combination of Hebrew and Arabic. Okay, so it's the first time we've had bidirectional language support. That's a big deal, particularly for those of you who are multinational and have a lot of locales that you have to work with and are concerned about language compatibility across your clients. Now, SP1 is available in 3 editions. You might have only heard of 2 of these. The 2 mainstream editions, one is the standard edition. That's available through both retail and volume channels. MPC is Microsoft product code, so if you actually want to order the product from us, that's the product code that you would use. The Enterprise Edition, that's available through volume only, but there again is the Microsoft product code. You can order that directly from us. The only difference in terms of server editions between Standard and Enterprise, Standard limits you to 5 databases per server, Enterprise limits you to 100 databases per server. That is the only difference between the 2 server editions. Now, there's another server edition. It's called the Hybrid Edition. You may have heard some of us, and perhaps me, refer to it previously as a Coexistence Edition. That was before it had a name. Okay? We've moved away from the term coexistence, and we've moved towards hybrid. So you're going to hear saying hybrid to discuss the combination of on-premises and cloud deployments. So when we talk about a hybrid deployment, we wanted to have a mechanism so that customers running 2003 and 2007 who, instead of going to 2010 on-premises, wanted to go to 2010 online, we needed to give them a gateway mechanism to get there. That's what the Hybrid Edition server is. And in fact, it's specifically used and can only be used for connecting your legacy Exchange 2003 2007 on-premises environment with Office 365. Okay, that's how it works. Now, if you do things with this server, like move a mailbox to it, create public folders, or do any other thing on that server that is outside the scope of the coexistence nature of that server, you will in fact have to purchase a regular license and licenses like you would any other Exchange server. So it's not meant to be a place where you move data or users. It's there to act as a gateway mechanism between the cloud and your on-premise organization. If your organization is really large, you can deploy multiple hybrid editions. So where do you get the hybrid edition? Well, you can't get it today. We're not giving out license keys today. So today, for those of you who want to try this in either a lab or a production environment, simply use the Service Pack 1 bits that you can download for the Download Center. It'll be the same exact thing. The only difference will be you won't have the hybrid edition product key. Once Office 365 is out of beta and generally available, it's at that point you can contact Office 365 support and request a hybrid edition product key or multiple keys if you need them. And they'll go ahead and provide you with those, and you can plug them into that server, and it will then, at that point, identify itself as the hybrid edition. Until you do that, it's going to identify itself as a trial edition. Now, I will say, speaking of trial editions, if you are a trial customer of Office 365, that is, you haven't bought, you're just trying before you buy, we won't give you a key for the hybrid server. You're going to need to come out of trial mode, actually purchase a subscription, become an Office 365 tenant, and then you can get the key for the hybrid server. Now, there's also a different mode of Exchange that you can deploy, and it's called hosting mode. Now, when I say you, the you I'm specifically referring to is licensed hosters. And by that, I don't mean somebody who hosts Exchange and sells licenses to their end users. By that, I mean an organization that has signed a licensing agreement with Microsoft to become an authorized licensor for Exchange Online, okay? Or hosted Exchange, rather. Now, hosted Exchange is slightly different from the on-premises that you're going to use. It's the same bits, but when you run setup with the hosting mode, it does different things, and it has different requirements. For example, there's no GUI. You have to use the command line when you want to run setup. You can't do it through the wizard and just click next. You have to use the GUI. You also can't deploy it into an existing Exchange forest. You have to roll your own new forest and then deploy into that. It is supported in a virtualized environment. That is something else that, although not part of today's announcement, will be made clear in our upcoming documentation so that if you are installing it in hosting mode, we will support that in a virtualized environment as well. And there's some new commandlets that you're going to be using that are unique to that mode that simply don't apply to on-premises because they're related to things like tenant plans and service plans and things like that that are unique to hosting mode. There's also some limitations that we impose on you as well. There are certain features that are native to Exchange that simply haven't been extended or are not available into hosting mode. So, for example, coexistence with 2003 and 2007. Obviously, if you're deploying in a brand new forest, you won't be coexisting with any previous versions of Exchange. There's also no Exchange Management Console. So the best GUI that you get for managing in a hosted environment is the Exchange Control Panel. Otherwise, all the hosting is done through the Exchange Management Shell. Public folders are not available. The UM and the Edge transport roles cannot be installed using the hosting setup switch. Although I will point out this because it's come up on some internal DLs lately. You can take a standalone Edge transport server and have it sit in front of hosted Exchange that's been deployed in hosting mode. What you cannot do, however, is deploy Edge using the hosting switch or use the Edge sync functionality to synchronize between your hosted hub and an external Edge. You simply cannot do that. Federation isn't available yet. Cross-premise message tracking and calendar sharing isn't available yet. Support for Outlook 2003 is not available, and that could be a big deal if you've got some hosting customers that are still on legacy clients. And then, of course, there's all these setup switches that go along with this long list of features that obviously won't apply because the features themselves don't apply. Now, the latest updates, just in case you guys aren't sure what the latest update is, for SP1, it's update rollup 3. And yes, this update was pulled and re-released and pulled and re-released. So you want to make sure that you're basically on what we consider version 3 of this update rollup. If you're not sure, that's the build number. You can very quickly go and check your actual version number. If you're not sure how to do that, I'm going to show you how to do that later. And the latest update roll for RTM, if you're not yet moved to SP1, is update rollup 5. And that came out a while ago, so as you might expect, based on our update history and how often we release them, you might imagine there's some updates coming for both of those in the near future as well. If you want more information and you want to do a quick reality check and verify the build numbers, go to that wiki. We've documented every update we've released. So whatever build you're running, whatever update you're on, you can look at that build number and track it back and find the exact version that you're on and know whether or not you're running the latest bits. Okay, let's talk about planning and deployment tools. How many of you are actually in the process or are about to start migrating to 2010? Okay. So I'm speaking to all of you in this next section. It's very important that you understand the really plethora and wealth of tools that are available to do this. Yes, there's a lot of documentation. In fact, I've got my colleagues from the documentation team are here as well. And yes, we've done a good job providing you a huge amount of great documentation. But we don't expect you to read it all. And in fact, we don't want you to read it all just to get the deployment done. We want to make the deployment part as easy and as quick as possible because we know a bad deployment really sours it for down the road. If you don't deploy Exchange correctly, it's very hard to get out of that and undo that. Okay, so what sort of tools do we have available? Well, one of them is this pre-deployment analyzer. You download that, it's an MSI file, and it will basically look in your environment. It's not looking at the servers that you're running on, but it's looking at things like Active Directory and some of the other aspects of your environment, and it's validating that they're ready for an Exchange 2010 deployment. If they're not, maybe your force functional level is not where it needs to be. Maybe one of your global catalog servers isn't running the appropriate service pack. This tool will tell you about that and give you step-by-step instructions on how to fix the problem so that you can move forward with your deployment. You don't need to run this on the Exchange server. You can run it on any of those operating systems. So as the administrator, if you want to run it from your desktop and have it scan and analyze the environment for you, you can do that as well. Now, once you've done that, then there's another tool that you're going to want to look at. It's the Exchange Server Deployment Assistant. So we talked about the various scenarios. We talked about customers who need to do on-premises deployments. But there's also customers in this room who said they needed to upgrade from 2003, so we have your scenario covered. There's customers who said they needed to upgrade from 2007. Your scenarios are covered. And there were a few of you who said you had both. We've covered that scenario as well. Of course, some of you might be coming from a non-Exchange environment, so we cover the new Exchange org scenario as well. And some of you may want to go to the cloud, and perhaps a cloud-only deployment. Well, we've got that scenario covered as well, obviously doing that through Office 365. And then, of course, there's the hybrid environment. Again, that's the on-premises plus cloud. In the hybrid environment, you've got a choice of scenarios. Okay, right now, we have the scenarios for 2003 and 2007 ready, and very soon we'll have the scenario for going from Exchange 2010 to the cloud as well. Okay, so it's a very awesome tool. Everybody should definitely go to this website and check it out. And in fact, that's what it is. It's a website. You go to it, you answer literally like 4 questions. And after you've answered those 4 questions, you click Next, and it spits out for you all of the documentation for all of the steps you need to do your exact migration. And not only does it tell you what to do, it also gives you step-by-step instructions on how to verify that what you just did worked successfully and was, in fact, done correctly in your environment as well. So think of it as a bunch of experts in Exchange migration and deployment basically holding your hand and telling you what to do every step of the way. It's really, really difficult if you follow these instructions to mess things up. You'd have to go out of your way to mess up your deployment after following our instructions. Now, we also welcome feedback, and you can give us feedback right from the tool. And when you do that, people will jump on that feedback and correct any bugs that are necessary and basically help keep this tool fresh and current and up to date. And then, as I said before, the scenario for Exchange 2010 is also coming soon, and we'll continue to develop this as time goes on as well. But this, more so than almost any of the other tools I'm going to talk about, this is going to be one of the most important tools that you want to use to do your actual deployment. Now, another important tool is the Mailbox Server Role Requirements Calculator. In Exchange 2007, we called this the Exchange Mailbox Storage Calculator. We don't call it that anymore because it's doing a lot more than storage now. It's looking at things like user profile. It's looking at your HA architecture and site resilience architecture. It's looking at your server CPU platform. It's looking at your storage, your backup technology, your network technology, and all these different facets. And basically, once again, giving you expert guidance as to how your LUN should be architected, how your databases should be laid out, and so forth. What bandwidth requirements you have based on your user profile and your log generation traffic and so forth. So this really does all of the heavy lifting for you with respect to figuring out all that hard stuff. You do need to go gather some information, for instance, the user profile information, so that you can plug that into the calculator and have it do its thing. But once you've done that, then it takes all the guesswork out of it for you, and it gives you that direct guidance. Now, I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder, but I happen to hear that if you go to EXL312, which is Ross Smith's designing mailbox high availability for failure domains, I hear there's going to be some exciting news about the storage calculator. I'm sorry, the mailbox server role requirements calculator in that session. So if I were you, I'd think about attending that. Okay, let's talk about scripts and troubleshooters. How many of you have actually gone through and browsed the scripts directory in Exchange 2010? And be real, don't just say you've done it because you did a DIR on it and saw what was in there. I mean, really browsed and took a look at what was in there. Yeah, not too many hands went up, and it's not too much of a surprise. It's unfortunate that's the case, but it's not too much of a surprise. I would strongly encourage all of you to go looking through the scripts directory. I'm not going to have time to talk about all the scripts that we have in there. I'm going to highlight some that I think are really important for you to know. But there are a lot more scripts that are in there that you want to be aware of. There's a ton of things for doing all sorts of cool things that's fully automated. So even if you're very well versed in PowerShell and scripting languages and you know how to automate things really well, check out the scripts we have built in because we've already done a lot of work to do some of these more interesting things for you. And again, I'll point out some of those in a minute. First, though, I want to talk about a troubleshooter because it's not enough just to get the deployment right. You also need to verify that things are working from the outside as well. It's very easy to verify things are working from the inside. You spin up a mailbox, you open it up, fire up OA inside, that works. Maybe you run some of our test commandlets and verify that they're healthy. But it's typically not until the administrator goes home later that night and then tries to access their own mailbox over OA, or maybe tries to synchronize their phone over ActiveSync. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to come up with a way for administrators to actually test these things from an external perspective without having to go home first. Okay, so what happened is we had a couple engineers on our support team actually come up with the idea of leveraging a lot of Exchange Web Services and coming up with this website that you can go to, and the website will exercise Exchange Web Services APIs against your organization and tell you whether or not things are working right. And what's really cool about the tool, if things aren't working right, if anything fails along the way, not only will it tell you what failed, but in a lot of cases, it's going to give you guidance as to how to fix what's failed. You might see things like, the ISA server isn't publishing the virtual directory I tried to connect to. Well, obviously, you've got to go to ISA and have it publish that virtual directory. So that's just one of many examples of the tool's helpfulness. So let me show you just a real quick demo here. I've got the tool embedded into PowerPoint here. To get there, you're just going to https://www.testexchangeconnectivity.com. You do need S for SSL. We won't accept plain text connections because we are transmitting password information and we want to make sure that that's encrypted. So you do need to go to SSL. And you can see there's a whole bunch of choices here. I can test ActiveSync connectivity, including AutoDiscover for ActiveSync. I can check web services, things like OOF, or if I'm doing some sort of development against web services, I can verify service account access. I can check Outlook Anywhere in Outlook 2003, 2007, and 2010. And then, of course, I can check Outlook AutoDiscover for 2007 and 2010 as well. And then if I just want to test internet email, inbound and outbound, I can have this send me some SMTP messages as well. So in this scenario, we're going to go ahead, and choose Outlook AutoDiscover. I'm just going to pick that one and click Next, and we'll go here. Then what you do is you enter some information. We're actually testing against your live production account, but that doesn't mean that you go ahead and give us your administrator username and password and pass these in and have them use us. It's totally safe for you to give us whatever credentials. We don't store them. We just use them for the test. And as soon as the test is completed, they're gone from memory and not recoverable at that point. But that having been said, the safest bet is always the best bet. And the way to do that is to simply use a disposable account that once the test is completed, either deprecate that account or change the password just to be on the safe side. Again, personally, I think there's zero risk of any compromise of your password or credentials, but to be on the safe side, and as we warn you in the application, you'll want to use a username and password that can be changed or thrown away after the test is done. So I put some information in here. There's also this box that says Ignore Trust for SSL. That's if I'm using SSL certificates that don't have a trust chain that can be validated externally So for instance, if you're using your own PKI infrastructure internally, you've deployed your own certificates, obviously this won't be able to go up to your internal certification authority and verify that chain. So you would check that ignore trust for SSL checkbox. If you're not using your own private in-house PKI, don't worry about that checkbox. Then you do have to check this box. It says, I understand I'm giving you credentials for a real Exchange account in my organization and that we're only using it for testing, but that ultimately you as the administrator, as the provider of those credentials, are the party responsible for managing that account. So in other words, change the password when you're done. And then we also want to verify by putting in human information in here as well, just to make sure it's not some bot that might have credentials that's using this tool to maybe DOS or do some other nasty things to your environment. So I go down here, and then I get the Perform Test button, and I click on that. And the test actually takes a little longer. In case you're not sure, these are screenshots. I'm not actually testing. So what you will see is you'll see a little wheel go around as it's actually doing the web service call into your organization, verifying whatever credentials you gave it, and then performing whatever test you selected. And hopefully, if everything is configured correctly, you'll get a connectivity test successful, you'll get the green checkbox, and life will be good. If life isn't good, you would be over here clicking on one of these arrows next to an error message, and then that would expand with more information to tell you what the problem was and perhaps provide you with hints on how to get around it as well. Okay, so again, www.testexchangeconnectivity.com, and you do need to use HTTPS to get there. Now, let's talk about Mailbox Assistance Troubleshooter. Why is this so important? In fact, many of you, even on Exchange 2010, you might not have even heard of Mailbox Assistance, but they're there. And they're there doing things in the background to help maintain the integrity and health of users' mailboxes. Okay, they're doing things like MRM, FreeBusy, calendar repair, and so forth. And they're basically doing all these functions in the background. So a lot of times, administrators don't have a lot of visibility into them unless an end user calls them with a problem, and suddenly they have to go digging and realize that, oh, FreeBusy hasn't been published for 2 weeks, and that's why nobody can get anybody's availability information now. So it's those kinds of things. So you always want to make sure that these mailbox assistants are healthy and running. And that's what the Test Assistant Health commandlet will do for you. This is not a script. It's an actual commandlet, as are many of the other test commandlets. And when you run this, it will actually do not just diagnostics on the mailbox assistance itself, but if it finds a problem it can fix, it will fix it. If it finds that the mailbox assistance is hung, it will terminate it and restart it. And it'll do other things to help maintain the health. And of course, if it finds a problem it can't correct, it will let you know about that in the resulting output of the commandlet. Now, what's really cool is you can have it fix stuff or not fix stuff. There's this resolve problems parameter, one of my favorite name parameters, by the way. I wish everything had a resolve problem parameter. Just use that all the time. But this one actually does what it says. It will actually go and resolve the problems. It'll start the service if it's not running. It'll restart the service if it's hung or deadlocked for more than 15 minutes. Okay, those are the kinds of problems it can fix. And as I said, they don't seem like big problems, but they can turn into really big problems if it's left unattended and in a bad state for some time. Okay, let's take a quick T-shirt break. Who can tell me on what day we RTM'd Exchange 2010? Just raise your hand if you know it. I think your hand was up first. October 9th, and the year was? 2009, okay. Would you like a Super Sparkle Happy t-shirt or a Geek Out with Perry? Geeking Out with Perry, all right. I hope I don't hit anybody. Again. Okay, no, I haven't. Okay, let's talk about another troubleshooter, and this one is actually another thing that originally I wasn't going to talk about. I've actually talked about this one before, and I wasn't going to include it in this. And then I saw questions coming up on internal DLs for people asking, what do I do for log growth troubleshooting? They didn't seem to know the script existed, even though we've talked about it before, even though it's in the documentation, and even though it's very discoverable in the scripts directory. So I want to make sure you all know of this script because it's very important and, in fact, specifically designed to address the scenario when you've got excessive log growth issues. Now, what the script is actually designed to do, it's designed to figure out for you if it's a user causing this problem with their mailbox. Okay? And it can actually go one step beyond that. It can actually quarantine the user for 6 hours if it finds that the user, something is going on their mailbox that is causing this excessive log growth. Now, I'll point out another script file, the store tsconstants.ps1 file. That stands for store troubleshooter constants. Okay, and I mention that because the troubleshoot database space script is not the only script that uses that constants file. That constants file is where we have the default settings for these scripts. So you may find yourself in that file modifying some of the default settings. Now, in most cases, you won't have to, but you may be in an unusual environment where perhaps the latency threshold or a time threshold just doesn't work out for you, and you need to go and edit that one way or another. You'll do that in the store tsconstants file, and the troubleshooter will use the settings that you've set there to go ahead and do its thing. Now, one of the things that it does is it actually is looking at the log generation rate, it's looking at available free disk space, and it's looking at your top 25 mail users at that time, at the time the script is running. So that can change throughout your environment. Of course, it's going to vary based on users and when they're doing their activity. But in this case, at the time you run the script, that's the time you've detected the problem, or at least the time you've decided to address the problem. And so it's going to be showing you the last 25 users that access the database, or the top 25 users, rather, that access the database in the last hour from when you execute the script. And then, as I said, you have this option. It's not going to do it automatically. You have an option where you can say, if it turns out it's mailbox users causing this, because I may be running out of disk space as a result of this, quarantine those mailboxes, which pretty much kicks the user out of the mailbox, and they get a message saying your mailbox has been quarantined, contact your administrator. But because they're kicked out of the mailbox, there's no more activity against that mailbox, and therefore there's no more logs being generated by that activity. So that's one way to sort of deal with this problem. Now, if it turns out it's not a user, or if it turns out that after quarantining users, that doesn't stop the problem, then it's going to go ahead and log an event, and it will take the extra step of removing the database from provisioning, which may or may not affect you at all. What we mean by remove from provisioning is when you create a mailbox, you actually don't have to specify what mailbox database it's going to be on. You can let Exchange pick it for you. It's got built-in provisioning logic to do that. And so you can just say, hey, Exchange, make me a new mailbox. I don't care where you put it. Okay? And whatever servers are available for provisioning, because they're not quarantined or because the administrator has not blocked them from provisioning, they'll be used, and the mailbox could go on any one of those servers. Now, obviously, if we have a server in jeopardy because we've got a database in jeopardy because its logs are growing out of control, we don't want to start adding more users to that database, so we will block that from provisioning programmatically and log that as part of the event log for the administrator to discover and act on. Now, a similar related tool, it's similar because, again, it's directly impacting the database and the user experience, and because it's using the store tsconstants file as well. This is a script that's actually already being used by System Center Operations Manager. So how many of you have SCOM in your environment? All right, so if you have SCOM in your environment and you're running the Exchange Management Pack, this script is probably already running for you. Okay? Now, if you don't have SCOM, or if you have SCOM but you don't want to wait for SCOM to kick it off, you can take this script and have it run as a scheduled task automatically for you. It's up to you if you want to do that, and you can do that with the other ones as well, but typically the other troubleshooters for when you've actually detected a problem, not for regular running. And what this will do, this will actually look at the performance counters being published by the disks themselves, things like the disk transfer rate and so forth. And it will tell you whether or not the amount of data going on the disk is exceeding the disk thresholds. Okay? Because if you already know how fast your disk should operate, you know how much data it can take and how much it can't. And if it turns out the amount of data is nowhere near the threshold of the disk just can't keep up, well, that's Exchange through this troubleshooter telling you, you've got a disk that's about to go bad, and you need to fix that disk. It hasn't gone bad yet, but we can tell, based on the transactional nature of what's happening on the disk and the performance counters being published by the disk, that this disk is not keeping up. It's not performant anymore, and chances are it's about to fail. Okay, so it's semi-predictive failure. It's not true predictive failure technology because it's not monitoring the actual disks through any APIs in real time. It's just looking at their performance metrics. But still, if you find out that you've got high disk latency coupled with low activity, again, that's a really bad sign. Your disk is probably on its way out, and that's what this is designed to tell you. You want to replace that disk as soon as possible. And again, if it turns out that it's something else causing it, maybe there's some mailbox threads that are taking too long, or maybe there's some mailbox activity that's unusual and spawning more threads than you might expect. Here, too, this script, if it determines it's a user, has the ability to quarantine their mailboxes, once again, for 6 hours by default. Want to change? OK. Now, there's also another troubleshooter that we have, and this one I don't see actually a lot of documentation on it. I don't think we have actually documented the script anywhere, and I haven't seen too many blogs on it, so we might have one coming in the future. But basically, this is Troubleshoot CI, troubleshooting the content index. Okay? By the way, I should have mentioned this earlier. I see a lot of you taking pictures of the screen, which is cool, or writing notes, which is also cool. But we are recording this, and you will get the slides. So everything I'm saying and everything you're seeing, except for those awesome videos at the beginning, you will have available for you to download. The videos, I'm sorry, they will cost you some money. OK. So troubleshooting CI, obviously its name implies it's there for troubleshooting problems with the content index. And again, that may or may not impact you depending on your environment. But if you have online clients, if you're using Outlook Web App, if you've got ActiveSync clients searching the server, if you've got Outlook in online mode doing searches, you're using the content index that Exchange is maintaining on the mailbox server itself. Okay, and you want to make sure that the index is healthy. And there's sometimes problems that can occur in indexes. There can be deadlocks. If indexing messes up somehow, there can be stalls where it thinks it's supposed to be crawling, but it's not actually doing anything. There could be corruption. Maybe there's a bad block on the disk, and you're in a JBOD environment, and that caused some sort of corruption in the index. Or maybe there's a backlog. The index, just for whatever reason, is not able to keep up. Well, that's what the Troubleshoot CI script is meant to do for you. Now, the default setting, Action Detect is the default setting. And what that means, it's just going to look for problems. It's not going to fix anything. It's just going to look for problems, and if it finds them, it will tell you about them. If you wanted to fix the problems for you, that's when you would set the action to either detect and resolve, to do it all in one pass, do the detection and then fix the problems. Or if you already did the detect only, and now you're ready to resolve the problems, you would just use the action to resolve, and it would go ahead and resolve those for you. Okay, so there's an example command, troubleshoot PI. You give it the database name, the symptom that you want to look for. And in this case, I've got the action set to resolve. So if it does find corruption for the index for DB1, it will go ahead and fix that up for me. And in some cases, fixing that up simply means throwing away the index and starting with a fresh one. Okay. Now, I mentioned some other scripts. Now, how many of you have had to move the mail.q file on a hub transport server? How many of you have had to move the transport database? We've actually got some documentation on how to do that process. It involves modifying the paths inside a config file and then restarting the transport service and doing a few other things. There's several steps that are involved. And you can do all those steps, or you can simply use move transport database.ps1, pass in parameters, which just so happen to be the same exact parameters you'd be modifying in the config file anyway, and just let the script do all the work for you. Okay? Stop the transport service, make the configuration changes, move the mail.q file, and restart the transport service. It'll do it all for you. You won't have to do anything except give it the options of where you want that database located. So instead of using the documentation that walks you through all those steps, just use the script and make it easy on yourself and let the system do the work for you. And in fact, if you're curious, it's also a great script to look at to figure out how we're doing some of these things as well. So it's a good learning exercise to understand how we manipulate things when we're scripting programmatically. Now, it does perform many tasks. So it's doing things like validating free disk space. It's not just going to move it anywhere for you. It's got to make sure we have enough free disk space so that we don't trigger back pressure as soon as we've done the move. It also creates the paths. You don't even have to create the path ahead of time. It will make them for you. And it will assign the appropriate permissions inside of Exchange to those paths. So you don't even have to ACL any directories or any shares or anything. As I said, it will stop the transport service. It will back up your config file. So if for whatever reason, maybe you made a typo or you wanted to go back or just see what the original settings were, you'll have a backup of the config file you can open up and see what it was like beforehand. And then assuming the move of the database and its associated files complete successfully, then it'll just start the transport service and it's back up and running. Takes, I'd say, maybe about 30 seconds to a minute in just about any environment. Of course, depending on where you're moving the fat and how much data might be in your mail.q file at that time, it could take a little bit longer if it's really large. Now, typically, messages are coming and going. They're not staying in there. But if you're in a high availability environment, you may have data inside the transport dumpster that could account for a large mail.q file. I think the battery's dying on this. All right, let's talk about the power of PowerShell. How many of you have used PowerShell before? All right, how many of you have not? Maybe that's an easier way to look at hands. Don't be shy. Don't be shy or embarrassed. Seriously, it's okay. There's lots of things I haven't done. Not too many, but. Okay, so everybody's used PowerShell. Okay, well, great. So then I probably don't need to go through all the basics of using it, like the get command, which will give you a list of the commands, or get ex command, which will give you a list of just the exchange commandlets that are registered, or using wildcards, like with find params, or the wildcards itself, or pipelining, which is taking the output from one commandlet and sending it perhaps to another commandlet. And I'm going to show you a lot of examples of pipelining. And get tip, which is a great way to get that tip of the day that you get when you first open up the exchange management shell. And hopefully many of you know this, but in case you're not aware, the Exchange Management Console has no business logic in it. It's actually built on top of the shell. So anything that you do in the console, all the wizards, all the properties, all the dialog boxes, any actions you take that result in a configuration change or an update or even just viewing information is all being executed under the covers in the shell. And the wizards in particular, when you're done with some of the wizards that we have in the GUI, they will actually show you the command shell command line that they ran to do the task for the wizard. And what you can do there is you can actually do Control-C on that dialog, and it will copy the entire dialog, including the script, and then you can just take out the script part and rerun that separately and not have to go through a wizard each time. And start automating and scripting things and make perhaps your day go a little bit faster than clicking next over and over in a wizard. Now, we talked about the scripts directory. Now, the scripts directory, by default, is actually under Program Files, Microsoft, /Exchange Server, /v14/scripts. Even with the tabs, where you can just start typing PR and hit tab, and it'll expand Program Files, that's too much typing for me. I just like to do cd space $x scripts, which is an internal alias that we've assigned to the scripts directory. So that when you do cd to that, it's automatically going to switch you right to the scripts directory, and then you can start executing your scripts. This is also handy for when you're doing batch files that need to change the directory quickly to the scripts directory to execute them locally. Okay. Now, we talked about the editions of Exchange. You want to find out a quick and easy way of what edition you're running without having to bring up the GUI. You can do that one of two ways. If I do get Exchange Server up at the top, that's looking at all my servers, and it's going to give me the name and the edition of all those servers. If I do get Exchange Server with a specific server name, it's going to tell me just the edition of that server itself. And that way, you'll know at a glance whether or not you're running Standard or Enterprise. Now, what about version information? Okay, that's the build number. Okay, that's different. You have to get that a different way, and that's actually getting Exchange Server, but instead of getting the edition back, you're asking for the version information back. And here again, you can do that for all your servers, which if you're in a small environment, you might want to use the top example. If you're in a very large environment, I wouldn't do that. I would instead target it towards specific servers rather than just blast out and try and get all your servers. Okay, let's get a little bit more powerful. Now, these are one-liners. Okay, so even though they're word-wrapped, it's one line that you would execute inside the Exchange Management Shell. So, for instance, the top one is going to give you a list of all your AD servers, or all your AD sites and server roles by site name. So if you want to know what server roles do I have in each of my Active Directory sites for Exchange, simply run that one, and we'll give you all of that information, along with the admin display info as well. So you'll have the version information to go along with that. If you want to create an alias for a shortcut, start with new alias, give it a name, in this case like get OPR. So now instead of having to type get Outlook protection rule every time I want to run that commandlet, I can just type in get-opr, and the system, because I've defined it as an alias, now knows I mean to use that commandlet instead. And aliases can be temporary. You could use them just temporarily in a script and then pass them around to pass values in and out. Or you could set them permanently like we've done with X scripts and then have them there always and forever for whoever needs to use them. Now, another thing, you might want to check and figure out what is the service startup setting for some of your services. Like, for instance, one of the most important services in a high availability environment is the Microsoft Exchange Replication Service, or MS Exchange REPL. If that service isn't running, I don't get automatic recovery in my database availability group. It won't do anything. It won't ship logs. It won't seed. It won't give me health and status. And it won't give me that automatic failover. So I need to make sure that service is always running. How can I do that? I can simply use get-WMI object, going into WMI, into the Win32 service namespace, and filtering based on the short name of the service itself. Once I do that, that'll tell me if the service is running and what its startup value is set to: manual, disabled, automatic, and so forth. Some other ones. Here's a way to list all the non-empty transport queues. So maybe you need to do some maintenance on hub transport servers. Maybe you need to move them around. But maybe you just want to find out which queues in our hubs are not empty. You know, particularly if you're at a small or medium-sized environment, messages should go into hub and go out pretty quickly, and they shouldn't have a queue buildup. Even in a large environment, a properly sized hub transport server is going to be able to move those messages pretty quickly, so you shouldn't see too much of a queue buildup. But if you're ever wondering what queues are out there in my environment that do have messages in them that haven't been delivered yet, that's what that first one is going to give you, and it's also going to give you based on the current date as well. Okay, so really powerful stuff. Some other information down at the bottom. Here's how you view the remote receive connector IP ranges. Okay, that's very handy when you want to make sure that your IP ranges on your connectors are correct. If they're not, you might interrupt or break message flow. Okay, so you always want to make sure what those IP addresses are set to. And of course, the other thing is you may just want to gather this information just for your change management purposes. So you can document what all the current settings are. Once you have that documented, you can rerun these scripts and find out if, in fact, the settings have changed. Here's another one. In fact, I just used this at a customer a couple weeks ago. They had a bulk message, a message sent to lots and lots of users. It was a mass mailing, and it was blocking transport. It was actually preventing message flow from going out. So what we did was we came up with this. We're using getQ to get a list of the queues. Then we're using getMessage, where the subject equaled a specific subject that was in that bulk message. We knew what the subject was, so that was pretty easy to do. And then what we did was any messages that we found that met that, we pipelined it to remove message, and that immediately removed it from the queue once it found it. Once that was done, all the messages were gone, and transport started flowing the messages again, and life was good. And we didn't have any problems with bulk messages. There is also this with NDR parameter. By default, when you do this, when you delete the messages from the queue, they will NDR the original user. You can use the with NDR parameter to suppress that. And you may want to do that because obviously there's going to be one sender and they know who it is because it's clogging it. So you might just tell them verbally, I'm purging the queue, you're going to have to resend your message later. Or if you want, just let it send them an NDR and they'll know that the messages were in fact deleted from the queue without being delivered. Okay, in Service Pack 1, we introduced a second form of continuous replication called continuous replication block mode. And instead of shipping transaction log files that have been closed by the active copy, we instead now in block mode can ship blocks of transactions right from the ESC buffer on the active copy to a corresponding replication log buffer on the passive copy. And in fact, continuous replication block mode by design is meant to operate completely transparent to the administrator. There's no dials, there's no settings, there's no lights, there's nothing really that will give you visibility as to what's going on with block mode unless you start doing some really deep tracing or unless you go deep into our event logging mechanism. But there is one way where you can look at a per database level and figure out, are they in file mode or block mode? Because we have this performance counter that we publish. Okay? And it's the MS Exchange replication slash, it's actually repeated twice, which is why I had that star there instead. If you look at the counter, it's actually MS Exchange replication slash MS Exchange replication, but instead of typing that out twice, use the asterisk for the second instance of that. And then the actual counter name itself is continuous replication dash block mode active. And that counter will have a value of either 0 or 1, as you can see on a per database level in the example. Okay? If it's a value of 1, it's in block mode. Okay? Continuous replication is up to date. The copy queue length is 0, and we're shipping blocks of ESE transaction across the wire asynchronously. If it's 0, continuous replication is operating in file mode, and we're shipping closed transaction logs from one side to the other. That's the only difference. This is the quick and easy way to figure out which databases are in file mode and which databases are in block mode. Now, transport dumpster. We actually did a lot of work in Exchange 2010 to refine the transport dumpster, particularly from an I/O and efficiency standpoint. One of the things that we did was we actually plugged it into the replication pipeline so that as replication, continuous replication, replicates messages throughout the environment, in other words, to copies of the databases, once a message has been delivered to that environment and replicated to the other copies, arguably we don't need it in the transport dumpster anymore. Okay? Because we not only did it get successfully delivered to the active copy, but the logs representing that message were successfully transmitted to the passive copies as well. So what we do is once we have that data replicated throughout the system, because we don't need it in the transport dumpster anymore, we have the ability to tell the transport dumpster to purge a set of messages that have already been delivered, that don't need dumpster protection anymore. So that means generally at any given time, the contents of your transport dumpster is limited to just those messages that haven't been replicated throughout the environment yet. So if you're curious to find out, well, how much data is that and how many items is that, that's what this script will do for you. It'll look at today's date. It'll do get mailbox server, and we're looking at mailbox servers that are in a replicated environment because we're running get database copy status against them. So we're looking for multiple copies of mailbox databases. Then we're looking at the summary copy status, and then for each of them, we're asking for dumpster statistics. Okay, dumpster statistics is one of the parameters for get mailbox database copy status. And when you get these statistics, this is what it looks like. You get the server name, the date and timestamp for the oldest item that's in the transport dumpster, the size of the transport dumpster, not the size that you set it to, but the actual size of the data that's in there, and the number of items, in this case 28 in this example. Okay, so very rich data as to what's going on, because when you think about it, hub transport servers are mostly stateless with the exception of what's in the transport dumpster, which means the mail.q file, assuming the transport dumpster is empty or perhaps not in use because it's not a replicated environment, is simply disposable. You could throw away that Q database, and Exchange will happily create a new empty one. Okay, which is fine if there was no data in the old one, but if you had transport dumpster data, that's only and always in one hub transport server, so it's unique. It's stateful to that server. So this will tell you what information is in there so that if you do have to take it down for maintenance or whatever, you'll know whether or not you have data in the transport dumpster that might be needed as a result of a failover. Another common question we get is, how do I figure how much white space is in the database? And yes, there's an event log record that you can go and look at that will tell you how much white space is in there. But a very busy Exchange server could be pretty chatty in the event log. And you might not want to search through them, or the event might not be there anymore. And more importantly, you just want to find out today, right now at this moment, how much white space is in the database. And in fact, that's what the script will do for you. This is a little bit longer of a script. It's a little bit more complex than what we're doing. But basically what we're doing is we're using WMI queries to go in and actually look at some of the database property values themselves. And the property values is how we find out the exact amount of white space that's in the database. In fact, that's the same process that the eventing mechanism uses when it logs that event log entry to tell you that information. So what you can do is you can save this script top to bottom, save it as get whitespace. That should actually be PS1. Look at that. We're going to do some live editing here. That should be PS1. Oh, and look, it always was. So save it as that. Obviously, it's got to be a PowerShell script. An SP1 file is not going to do anything for you. Save it as PS1, and then just run get whitespace against the server name. and that will tell you how much white space is in all the databases in that server. Now, here's another one, and this one almost didn't make it into the deck, but at the last minute we did make it in there. The reason it didn't make it into the deck is because it involves an undocumented change inside of Outlook 2007 and Outlook 2010, whereby we made a change in Outlook 2010 and Outlook 2007 SP3 so that when you enable the extended performance data that an Outlook client can send to an Exchange server, we actually turned off some of that information, things like the IP address, the MAC address, the username, the client name, and so forth. We did that because in some scenarios, think for instance Office 365 in the cloud, in some scenarios that information having to be transmitted to an Exchange server that's not managed or that's in a hosted environment in Office 365, that could represent the disclosure of personally identifiable information, okay, PII. Okay? We don't want any of our products to ever either intentionally or accidentally divulge any PII without an administrator being informed that this possibly represents that and could transmit it. So there is a registry entry that you can add to Outlook 2010 and Outlook 2007 SP3 that when you add them with a specific value, it will re-enable the transmitting of this data. So if you're used to using things like get the logon statistics commandlet and you're wondering why it no longer returns the name, the IP address, and some of the other information, it's because we turned that off. And we turned it off because of the potential risk. And so for you to turn that on, you have to go and add one of these registry entries. Typically what you'll do is you'll just add the second registry entry. The first one is more of a group policy setting, but it will take precedence over the second one. Don't set them both, just set the second one. The first one may come into play if you ever are doing things later on in group policies. For instance, if we create an ADM template for Outlook 2010 that includes that, then you can use it. But it's really the second one. And then it's the enable perf tracking registry entry. It's a D-word value, and you set it to a hex value of 28. And that will then turn on retransmitting this information, the IP address, the MAC address, the username, and the client name, retransmitting it back up to Exchange, and you'll be able to collect it with the commandlets as well. So just be aware that when you're doing this, you are enabling the transmission from an Outlook client of this potentially personally identifiable information. So just be aware of that when you do this. And that's all I'll say about that. Okay, let's talk about what's news. Okay, some things that have happened recently that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, maybe you've got some questions about it. Let's talk about this, Kerberos authentication for MAPI clients. And this is a new recommendation that we came up with recently because we found a problem with Outlook clients and a potential for NTLM authentication bottlenecks. So when you think about the authentication settings in Outlook, the default setting is for it to negotiate. You can choose negotiate, you can choose NTLM, you can choose Kerberos, but the default setting is negotiate. And 99 times out of 100, when negotiate is used, ultimately the client is going to end up using NTLM to do that authentication. The problem is that could actually cause an NTLM bottleneck. It might slow down authentication, and it could cause a poor user experience to take place. And in fact, that problem will compound itself as the number of MAPI connections increases to the server. So what we recommend that you do is instead of using NTLM, we want you to enable Kerberos authentication. This is something that we delivered in Service Pack 1. We gave you an ASA script that you can use for an alternate service account credentials, and one that will roll those credentials forward for you periodically. And basically what we'll do is it will then reconfigure shared components inside of Exchange to start using Kerberos authentication instead of NTLM. And then Kerberos doesn't have this bottleneck at all, and so that you wouldn't have the problem anymore once you did that. Now, if you want a little bit deeper information on it, we've got the blog post where we announced this. That also tells you how to use the rollasa.ps1 script and how to actually do the implementation to changing from NTLM to Kerberos itself. But again, it's something we definitely recommend that you do, particularly when you've got a large number of Outlook MAPI clients that you're working with. Another thing that's changed How many of you have had to do SSL offloading because you've got some other SSL termination endpoint? Okay, not too many. We did make a change in SP1. In RTM, if you wanted to do SSL loading, there were two things you had to do. You had to go into IIS Manager and uncheck SSL there. But then there was also this web.config file that you had to edit as well. In SP1, we changed it so all you have to do is go make the change in IIS Manager. You don't need to modify that web.config file. The reason I mention this is because if you do modify the web.config file, you're going to get an error message. It's going to be web host error 3, and it's going to be confusing and perhaps distressing for you because you believe you followed the correct instructions, but you didn't get the expected results. So there was a change. We don't require you to modify that web.config file anymore. Simply make the change in IIS Manager, restart, and life will be good, and you won't see that error again. So if you've had experience doing SSL offloading in Exchange 2010, and now you're on SP1 and you're wondering about this error message, that's where this is coming from. Simply don't edit the file anymore. And again, we've got details on it. There's a very important note in that file that explains how we don't need to use that anymore. Now, JetStress. How many of you have used JetStress? Great. I would encourage all of you to use it because it is the most awesome production tool, pre-production tool for making sure that your storage stack is ready for an Exchange mailbox server. And in fact, we did have some pretty good documentation with JetStress, but what we've also released now is these field guides. Okay, and we call them field guides because they're actually developed by MCS consultants who are out in the field and working with JetStress and customers every day. And so you not only get the benefit of the JetStress knowledge, but you also get the benefit of the real-world customer knowledge as well. So all of their notes from the field, all of their tips that they've got, they put into this field guide, which just got recently updated. So we had an earlier version of it. We've just updated it a few weeks ago, and I would strongly recommend that everybody download the new copy because you can see all the amazing and cool things that we've added. Some other things, there's a minor issue that we're tracking around running Internet Explorer 9 on an Exchange management tools installation. So that could be one of your server roles, or it might be an administrator workstation. What we've found is that if you have the Exchange Management Console open and IE9 installed on the box, and your focus of the Exchange Management Console is set to the organization config node, then you may have a problem closing the Exchange Management Console. You might get this error message up here that says you have to close all dialog boxes before you can close EMC. Okay, now there's two workarounds for that. One is, well, obviously uninstall IE9. I wouldn't recommend that. I think IE9 is a lot better than all the prior versions of IE, so I would keep it on the box. Another workaround is to use Task Manager, just terminate MMC. That's what the console runs in. It runs in the process of mmc.exe. Could be a little confusing for you if you've got multiple MMC apps open, though, for you. So another workaround is we're fairly sure, 99.5% sure, that this only manifests itself when you've got the org config and mailbox node selected. So before you close the console, simply select somewhere else in EMC, and then it should close fine for you. If it doesn't, I personally would like to hear about that from you. So if you repro with your focus elsewhere, please let me know about that, because like I said, we're pretty sure it's just in this one area, and we don't even see it manifesting in other MMC apps. Now, that having been said, our support engineers who've been working on this have done some extensive debugging and, in fact, have verified that this is not an Exchange bug. Okay? It might be IE9, it might be MMC, we're not 100% sure, but we have both of those other teams engaged in working on this. But we have, in fact, verified this is absolutely not an Exchange 2010 bug. So unfortunately, that means there's nothing we can do about it to help you solve this problem, but at least you've got some workarounds in the meantime. Let's see, we moved the Exchange Team blog. How many of you are used to going to msexchangeteam.com? All right, well, you can still go there. We'll redirect you to the new home, but there is a new home. The Exchange Team blog now lives on TechNet. And in fact, it's got a new look. It's got a new feel to it. There is one nuance I'll point out. You'll see some tabs at the top, things like videos, downloads, forums, library. There's a plus next to library, and if you click that, that's where you'll find other things. Okay, that's where you'll find cool videos. That's where you'll find scripts. That's where you'll find downloads. That's where you'll find a link to the documentation library as well. Okay, so you definitely want to get used to the new look and feel, and maybe change your bookmarks and go right to TechNet instead of msexchangeteam.com. We still own that. We still redirect, including in old topic URLs, and everything should move you over the same, but it's also much easier to go to the direct URL. And then, of course, you always want to stay up to date with our blog because that's where we announce cool things like we did this morning with virtualization changes. So an easy way to do that, one way is through an RSS feed, obviously, but another way is this Windows Phone 7 app that we have. Okay, so how many of you have a Windows Phone 7? I want to see everybody's hand go up, even if you don't have one, just to make me feel better. Okay. Awesome. Well, for those of you who have one or are about to get one, we now have an app. So that means right from Windows Phone 7, you can go ahead and peruse all the articles on the Exchange Team blog, have them sent to your phone right away. Here's what it looks like. It's a pretty nice looking UI. It's got the team blog up there. You can see how many posts, how many tweets, and so forth, and all the other good stuff about the blog. So check it out. It's a free app, and it's there available on Zune Marketplace. OK, so let's see. 9 minutes left. All right. Well, here's some related content. Again, when this session is being repeated, this session is being repeated tomorrow, but it's repeating at the same time that the virtualization session is going on. So I have memorized all your faces, and I don't want to see any of you in this session tomorrow. I do want to see you all at my HA session, but I really want you to go to the virtualization session because it's going to be a great chance to interact directly with the people who are responsible for everything that we're doing in Exchange virtualization. There's also some other awesome sessions that you want to go to as well, and I would definitely recommend going through the whole Exchange track. Don't forget about the evals as well. That's very important. OK, we do have a few minutes left, so I want to take questions. If you do have a question, though, please step up to the microphone so that everybody in the audience can hear you as well. And for those of you who can't stay, thanks very much for coming, and hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Where do we get these slides from?
Sir.
Oh.
You will be getting the slides. I didn't post them ahead of time because I didn't want to steal my own thunder from some of the announcements and some of the other things I weren't sure were going to make it in. But I've already copied it to the show directory, so as soon as they do their next publishing, they'll be available for download.
For those of us who didn't get to go to the SP2 session, is there anything you can tell us about what's coming with it?
Well, you missed the SP2 session? Yeah. Sure. So when Greg was here, he did the previous session. He talked about the 4 features, the 4 primary features that we're doing, things like address book policies, which is a form of GAL segmentation, a new app called OA Mini, which is very similar to Outlook Mobile Access, except it's all new code for mobile phones and microbrowsers. He talked about the hybrid coexistence wizard, which reduces the number of steps that you have to migrate from on-premises to the cloud, reduces it from 47 to something like 6 or 9, depending on your environment. And the last thing was a feature we're not quite sure that it will make it in, but we still talked about it, and that is a silent cross-site redirection in the case where CAS is discovering that you're not coming from the right site, so it's giving you that link to go to the other site, and you have to log in twice instead. So what we're trying to do is remove that link and just use single sign-on and pass you right in if you're using forms-based auth. So that's pretty much it. But again, his session was recorded, and his slides are available for download, and I strongly recommend seeing that recording. Yes, sir.
Can we have a return of the downloadable documentation that was available through 2007?
Good question. So we do have that. It's in CHUM format, and that's the only format you'd be able to download. We don't have it in Word docs. We don't have it in PDFs. It's just the CHUM file, the compiled HTML help file that
Is there a way to get it in downloadable documentation? Because CHUM files don't count. I want to print it out.
We are not working on that.
Okay, thanks.
So,
yes, sir.
In Exchange 2007, the retention environment had very nice reporting. As far as I've been able to determine, Exchange 2010 has absolutely no reporting for retention management. And I'm wondering if there's any thoughts on including that in the future, or maybe I'm mistaken and you can tell me about that.
Well, I can't speak to anything that may be coming in the future except for the SP2 stuff we already talked about. But I will agree with you that there is some work to do there with respect to reporting. I don't know if one of my colleagues is sitting. I don't know if you have any tips that you might want to pass on to this gentleman. Right. All right, I'll let you guys chat. Did you have a question? No. Okay. Over here? No? Here?
How many
Yes.
of those scripts for 2010 could be used for 2007?
Almost none of them.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
I
Yes.
was hoping.
So in case you didn't hear that, how many scripts in 2010 can be used in 2007? The answer is almost none of them. Yes. They were designed specifically for 2010.
Yeah. So I have a quick question.
Yes.
I was just wondering with the bulk mail, the bulk message removal from the queues, what queues are we talking about? Because we've had problems where we got stuff in the submission queue that we want to get out, and we can't remove anything from that
Sure,
queue.
so if you saw the script, it's actually just generically using get queue. So we're actually looking at all available, all visible queues in the system. So there's some hidden queues that we're not looking at, but it's all the visible ones. Let me pull this up here.
Does that include the mailbox servers, or are we just talking the hub transports?
There is no queue on the mailbox server. It's all in transport.
So it'd all be on the
Yeah.
transport? Okay.
So every hub
I always thought
transport
there was some
server.
queuing on the mailbox.
Pardon me?
I always thought there was some queuing on the mailbox, but there's not.
Well, there's queuing inside the mailbox itself until the store driver hands it off to transport, but that's just sitting. That's not a real queue. That's more like a message sitting in your outbox.
So it's nothing we can look at then, per se?
Not with that script. There are other ways to look into a database and see things that are trapped inside of an outbox or maybe stuck inside an outbox in OA and not showing up in Outlook.
Right.
You know, MFC Mappy would be a tool to do that.
Okay.
There are some properties using Get Mailbox database that you might be able to expose some, but not all of that information that you're looking for. But this particular example, not the one up here, but the one we're talking about, was specifically designed to go and clean out a transport queue that's stuck because some bulk message won't let the others go through.
Yeah, we had that here you have virus.
Yes, yeah. Now,
And that just
if
killed
you
us.
see that, now, the example that you saw will get rid of that in transport. If you
Right.
see it inside a mailbox database, then there's other what we call search and destroy mechanisms that you would take. So you can search across mailboxes, find items that meet criteria, and have them deleted. So that would be a way to do that using the search mailbox capabilities.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, God, 2007.
So what are some scenarios where you would use the block size replication versus the file size replication?
You don't have a choice.
Okay.
So the way it works is the system will automatically start in file mode, shipping log files like what you'd expect. Once the passive copy, and we're talking about just an individual passive copy of the database, it's on a per copy basis, so other copies might not be keeping up, but let's say we have a passive copy that keeps up. Copy queue goes to 0, and it tells the active copy, I need the next log file. The next log file happens to be the current log file, the E00, I'll just use that one. When that happens, that automatically shifts the system from file mode into block mode. And then once we're in block mode, that's when we're shipping the transactions between the buffers. Now, if it turns out we fall, I believe it's 4 megabytes behind, which would roughly translate into 4 transaction logs, it will revert back into file mode and go back into and continue that way until it catches up again, in which case it'll possibly change itself into block mode. So there's really, you don't have any control over it. It's just something if the system, if a passive copy is able to keep up, it'll be more resilient because we reduce the data loss potential.